Hi, I'm Dr. Morella. Welcome to part 5 of this video series, The Stories in Your Body. Now, this is a final episode, and this is where you get to embody your new story. This is my personal therapy room. It's my floor, it's actually not mine, but it's close to where I live. And this is where I embody my own stories that I want to change, and that's my silent therapist. I come here every morning for about 45 minutes after I drop off my children at the bus stop. And every day this gives me the chance to walk through a beautiful space in nature, to look at what is not working in my life, and to embody and manifest the stories that I do want in my life. And so what I'm going to invite you to do today is to finally get rid of the old stories that are making you sick. So right now, stop the video and go and find that sheet of paper from the last chapter where you wrote down your old story and also the one that you want to gain. Go ahead. Great. So you got your story now, the old one. And we've done this exercise in the past at a very conscious level, looking at elements in that old story that you weren't able to see before. And that can make you realize that that event in your life brought you something useful, something you can be grateful for. And so what you're going to do now is really embody that thankfulness, that gratitude for whatever happened. And so I'm going to illustrate this statement with one example of my own life. One of my main stories in the past was that I was alone. I'm on my own, I am alone. And although this had very good things, like the fact that I'm a problem solver, I can fix anything from a computer to the plumbing, also always driving forward. The downside was that even in relationships, I was very lonely. I felt lonely, I felt isolated, I felt that I was doing most of the work all the time. I didn't feel in company. So I looked at my old story, which was I am alone, and I thought, where does this come from? And I realized that there were two events in my childhood and teenage years that determined that story. And for me, it was at the age of 9. I am from Caracas, Venezuela, and so it's a city with 4 million people, and we speak Spanish. And my parents decided that for us children to learn English, the best way was for us to go and immerse ourselves in an English-speaking environment. And so what they did was send me and my brother to 2 different summer camps in the States, in America. And so for 2 months at the age of 9, I was in this camp where I didn't speak a word of English. Very few people knew a little bit of Spanish, like a few words. And I was left there for 2 months. Now, that didn't go down too well with me. I felt abandoned. I used to, once a week I could call my parents. I would call them up and cry and say, come and pick me up. I'm so miserable. I actually spent the whole 2 months at the nursing bay, at the infirmary. And I had tummy aches, throat aches, all sorts of things for 2 months. In the end, they gave me the trophy of the person who had spent the most time in the infirmary. Now the next year they did the same thing. They sent me to that camp again, and the next year, so I had in total 5 seasons in the United States in a camp that looked like this. It was in the middle of nature in Vermont. It was outstanding. And what I hadn't really captured all my life, I've told myself, yeah, it was painful, but my parents did this out of love because they wanted me to learn English, and how fabulous a skill is that. But I hadn't really embodied that story. So one day I came here and I started writing down, what did I gain out of being 9 years old and going to that summer camp in America? Well, the first obvious thing was I learned English. The other thing that I hadn't seen was that there were many people in that camp who were willing to love me and help me. That the nurse spent literally her whole summer looking after me. I remember my counselor trying to speak some words of English, the words that she knew. There were all these little girls who were trying to make contact with me, but I wasn't able to because in my mind I was alone and I had been abandoned. And what else did I learn? I actually was exposed. I was a fortunate child in the sense that coming from a city with 4 million people, I was in nature. So everything that I love today, I love because of that experience. I learned how to kayak. I learned how to ride a horse. I learned how to plant veggies. I learned how to do archery. I learned how to hike, swimming, engaging with different groups of people from different backgrounds. All of this I learned from that experience. And then once I realized that not only that, but my parents had done that out of financial commitment and their detachment, their forward thinking of, I can send my 9-year-old girl for 2 months somewhere in the other side of the world to learn English. And then I realized with all of those manifestations that I have always been loved. So there it was. Now I had fully, completely absorbed the idea that everything that had happened for my own good, and it came out of love. And so what I did out of that was decide, I have always been loved. And for weeks, every day, I would walk through this forest telling myself, I have always been loved. I have always been loved. I have always been loved. As I looked at the trees, I mean, what have I done to earn this tree that is here for me to see every morning, this beautiful light coming through the trees? I have always been loved. I have always been loved. I have always been loved. And so the more I repeated it day after day, the more I embody that new story that was, I have always, always been loved. And so I did this for weeks, and it became real. Not only it became real, but I realized that many people in the world had the same kind of suffering, thinking that they were alone. And here's where the magic happens. A few days after this process of a few weeks of I've always been loved, I saw a homeless young man, and like I've seen many in my life, of course, and I'm sure you have. But this time, I connected straight into his eyes. We connected, and I sat by him, and we had this beautiful conversation where I found out that the reason why he was homeless was because he had been to prison for some silly drug, moment in his life. And then after that, he couldn't get a job. So even though he was 27 and fit and healthy, he couldn't get a job. Nobody would give him a job. And so we had this conversation. I gave him money for the week to sleep somewhere dry. It was pouring, it was horrendous. And then a little bit later, I ran into another man that I had barely met before. And I was so impressed with this young, unemployed and homeless guy that I mentioned the story. He had been to prison and he couldn't get a job. Every time he went to an interview, he was rejected. And this other man told me, I was a convict too, and I've got a job in this particular company right now. They hire ex-convicts. So he gave me the card. I drove back a few days later to the same spot where I had found my homeless guy, and I gave him the card with the phone number of the company that would hire him. I haven't seen him again. But the last conversation we had, we looked at each other in the eyes, and he said, what can I do for you? And I said, you make me proud. You're going to make something beautiful out of your life. So as you can see from this story, the technique in order to acquire your new embodied story is to find the place where you can perform a ritual every day. And I suggest a minimum of 45 minutes, ideally 1 hour. It can be a beautiful forest, a park. If it has to be in the middle of your living room, make it so, crank up your music, whatever makes you happy. And then you focus on your new story. And for me it was, I've always been loved. And you say it aloud, and you say it in your breathing. You acquire some gesture that for you represents that story. For me it was this one. And then start running through your mind, through scenes and things in your life that confirm that this is the case. And for me, it was the presence of nature and the love of my parents and the love of my husband and the fact that I have 2 children. My dog was precious to me. It was all these things that proved to me that I've always been loved. And here's the third element. You must take action that is consistent with that new story. So right as I was reprogramming myself, I started doing things that I hadn't done before. I connected with the eyes of a homeless guy. I started inviting friends for coffee. I wasn't doing that before because I was too busy. And so I would sit down and look at them and really experience their love and their presence as people. And so the more I did these actions that were consistent with a new story, the more I reprogrammed myself. And I have no feelings whatsoever anymore about not being loved. I actually breathe love everywhere. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, well, that's pretty obvious. Your parents gave you something really special, but in my case, I was mistreated or I was abused or whatever it was that you want to think. And here's the thing. We all have somewhere the resources we need in order to make the change. We all have them. We all have a memory of a time in which we were exactly that new person that you want to be. And I'll give you an example. A few months ago, I saw a client, a woman, who was riddled with panic attacks. She couldn't get out of the house. She couldn't study, she couldn't socialize, she couldn't go out, she couldn't do anything. She was so stuck with the panic attacks. And she came to see me because I was basically her last hope. And so what I did with her was I asked her, how do you want to be instead? And she said, I want to be confident. Okay. So when have you been confident? And she started telling me all the story about how she had never been confident. And I said, hold on, that's not entirely true. There would be a moment in your life when, despite the fear, when despite the pain, despite the crippling panic attacks, you would have done something completely out of your comfort zone and you stepped out. And she said, yeah, actually, now you mention it, the other day, I was completely paralyzed and I made myself go to the grocery shop and buy some milk. Wow, okay. And so I said, okay, so let's place yourself in your mind in front of that grocery shop where, despite your total fear, you're about to enter. So picture the scene of that place, yeah? And hear what you heard that day and feel how you felt inside. And it was a mix of fear and courage. What do you say to yourself? You said, I can do this, I can do this. And so what we did was we walked around the room and she kept going, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this, I can do this. And we did this for about 10 minutes. Now, the interesting part of the story is I thought that that wasn't enough. And so we made an appointment for the week after that, which she canceled. And she postponed to a week after that. And so by the time she canceled the second appointment, I called her up and I said, hi, how are you doing? I'm just wondering what has been happening. Because I thought I would see you more. And you know what she said? Well, actually, I have canceled because I don't need to see you anymore. I've realized that I've always had this courage, that even if I'm terrified, I can make myself do things. And so in those 2 weeks, this woman had signed up to work as a volunteer at the hospice. She was cooking for a lady with cancer. She had signed up for something like an arts class, I think it was. And she had set herself to do a blog on cooking, because she was a good cook. Hello, that was out of 15 minutes or 10 minutes of her walking around my consult room saying, I'm doing this, I've got this, I'm doing this, I've got this, I'm doing this, I've got this. Out of the one little experience that she could remember, which was walking into that dairy and buying the milk. It's magic. Look at that old story. What did you gain out of that? And out loud, repeat to yourself, write it down actually, if you can. What did you gain out of that story? What have you got to be grateful for? What doors did that story open for you? And be grateful for them, embody the gratefulness and release that story, because now you can look at another angle. And then pick up your new story and create a ritual. And the ritual involves, what are you going to focus on? What are you going to say to yourself? And how are you going to feel it in your body? And embody it. Be it. Walk around like you are that person who feels that way and tells herself that thing. And then, and here's the important part, start taking action that is consistent with your new story. And once you start doing this, day by day, you will resolve your old story and be the new one. Now, I really hope that this series of videos has been useful to you. My intent with it was to provide you with the tools so you can start doing this process on your own. If this is not enough, I invite you to follow me, to reach out. I do private consults, I do weekend seminars, I do longer seminars. My intention, my purpose in life is to help people realize that they're not trapped in bodies that are broken. We're physical beings with emotional, mental, and spiritual dimensions. And by accessing all those levels and changing the stories that we tell ourselves, there's huge potential not only for healing, but also to realize your purpose in life, to help others and be one. I thank you for your attention. I'm really grateful for your time, and I hope to see you again.